Hello, everyone. Welcome to the City of Ottawa podcast series, OttaTalk, where we talk with staff about city programs, projects, and a variety of initiatives. Today, we OttaTalk about people experiencing homelessness. It is a growing problem in a lot of places, and we probably can't solve it in the next 20 minutes, but we're going to meet the people who are trying.
Our theme music to start the show is actually titled String My Guitar by the Roberto Hutchins Band. We start and end every podcast with a local artist that's featured on the City Sounds playlist on SoundCloud. You can find a link to our playlist in our show notes, and you'll hear more from the Roberto Hutchins Band at the end of our podcast. It's just one more reason to stay until the end.
All of those miles drive the blues away, dancing across the Bohemian sky, chicken in the air, chicken man tie. These are the days.
My name is Sébastien Tremblay, and I'm a communications strategist with public information and media relations.
And my name is Shirley Mann. I'm a leadership coach and strategist for the Department of Public Works. And we're looking forward to having a very important discussion today about people in Ottawa who are experiencing homelessness.
And when we talk about housing and homelessness, we're talking about more than just the people you see maybe sleeping rough on the streets. It could be anything, people in shelters, in community housing. And I actually have some personal experience growing up in Ottawa. When we first moved here, I'm a twin, so I've got a brother and my mother. We moved here, all three of us, and we started off in a women's shelter. And we made our way through the system with social and community housing, through Ottawa community housing, until we were eventually able to get, some market rent housing when I turned about 15. So I have a lot of experience with the system, and it's something that's really close to my heart, and I really believe in it. And I know you have a similar experience, Shirley.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Seb. I grew up in social housing in Toronto. And one of the things that I think about that we actually talked about before today was you can't really tell when you meet someone what that experience was like for them and whether or not they experienced social housing or not. And so I think it was really meant to be that we met each other and get to host this conversation today with some of the people who are working on this issue. During our conversation today, we're going to be answering questions like, who are the people experiencing homelessness or lack of housing in Ottawa? And what are we doing to help them? And how does Ottawa compare with other cities? To answer some of these questions, we're going to be joined by Kale Brown, the Director of Housing and Homelessness for the City of Ottawa.
Before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping notes. Any city programs or services we talk about today will be in the program notes wherever you're streaming this podcast. Or you can search for them on the city website, ottawa.ca. The program notes also have a link to the city's YouTube channel where you will find our entire podcast archive. If you have a comment or question about any of our podcasts, just send us a message at podcast-balado@ottawa.ca.
Joining us today is Kale Brown, the Director of Housing and Homelessness for the City of Ottawa. So Kale, you joined the city in 2008, working in public health, transportation services, and now with community and social services. I know that you attended school at the University of Ottawa, but you didn't start into the social services world really until later in your career. And we're so excited to talk to you. So Kale, welcome to OttaTalk. Tell us a little bit about how you transitioned into the world of social services.
Well, I actually never thought in a million years I would find myself working in the world of social services. My background I'm more on the business side of things, but I actually got the opportunity a number of years back to work with housing services in a business support role, and I realized they're solving the most complex problems we have in the city. Immensely difficult, so many people involved, but the difference you can make if you do it well and you really work hard at it and kind of work together and be creative is immense. So it was a wonderful opportunity for me to kind of bring a very different set of skills to being a pure social services worker over into something that's a little different, something that actually is going to impact people's lives more directly and really make a difference. It was awesome to hear about your stories initially. It is why we do this kind of thing, and just hearing those little moments is why I found it interesting. So I've really started to be able to just push a little bit more, ask questions, because I don't come with that lens. So that's how I kind of got into it. And I love just that the impact is so big in people's lives and will make difference for years to come for so many families and single people out there.
So when we're thinking about Ottawa specifically, overall, there were close to about 10,000 people who accessed a placement in our shelter system in 2024. And that's up from only about 7,000 in 2020. So all these people, who are they? Can you talk to us a little bit about who are the people experiencing homelessness in Ottawa? Or should we ask, why are people experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, so it's a complex question to answer. Everybody's story is different at the end of the day. We see big trends that change in homelessness year to year in terms of where's the biggest demand coming from. But a lot of people, even if you're not experiencing homelessness, you run into things like housing affordability. That's a huge issue we've seen since the pandemic. The price of groceries, food, everything you need to live your life has gone up in price. And at the end of the day, people who are on minimum wage jobs, people who are the working just not at the level that, high price, some government jobs working in the tech industry, it's really challenging just to afford your basic rent. And when you have that on top of family needs, that kind of thing, it just further compounds the problem. So that's a big piece of it. And homelessness does exist in many forms. We don't just have something simple as there's one reason. We know a lot of the times people may run into mental health illness. They may have addiction, support needs, that kind of thing. And we're not able to provide those. Working closely with the healthcare system, we run into these issues all the time. So some things, the root causes of homelessness change for everyone. But at the end of the day, housing is just very unaffordable and it's challenging to make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about working with these people, there's just a wide range of people. We're partnering with different organizations like Indigenous communities on top of that, where we're developing Indigenous housing and homelessness strategies, and we're ensuring we have a culturally safe and Indigenous solutions to address an overrepresentation of their population within that sector. So on that, can you talk a bit more about the roles that different levels of government and different organizations play in helping solve homelessness?
Yeah, so housing and homelessness is a big issue. Takes big money to solve it, and we do invest a lot of money across the board. The way it actually works in terms of our funding model, how do we actually provide the services here in the city? It's quite complex, but essentially what it is we, as the City of Ottawa, act as the service manager or community entity. Essentially what that means is we get to oversee all of the funding from the federal and provincial governments allocated in the community for the most part. So what we do is we come up with a housing and homelessness plan that kind of outlines how we're going to use that money, and then we work with the different levels of governments under their different funding frameworks as the service manager or community entity to make sure that that funding gets out there in the community to address the issues that are identified in the 10-year housing and homelessness plan.
And what kind of issues have we identified in that plan? Just high level, one or two.
Well, really the big issues is housing affordability, making sure that people are able to get the supports they need. So around mental health, addictions, making sure that if they're in housing, they're stabilized. We also really want to be focusing on working upstream. So we want to make sure that we're doing housing loss prevention. That's a big piece of it. We don't want to see anyone go into homelessness. It's a traumatizing experience. So we're really trying to do that piece of it, work upstream and making sure that all of our dollars are being used to go as far as they can.
And just to clarify, by upstream, you mean before they get into that situation where they don't have a place to live.
Exactly. We want to be working on housing loss prevention. That's the big thing, and rapid rehousing. Homelessness is extremely expensive for the city to dealing with. So we want to be dealing with it before people become homeless. It's a cheaper intervention. We know it works, and it also prevents that traumatizing experience going through the shelter system.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, thanks. Now, you talk about the availability and affordability of housing. The shelter system has reached occupancy levels averaging about 81.3% above permanent bed capacity. Our shelter system is like beyond full. So, and it goes without saying that there's no easy one-step solution to housing and homelessness. And I know you must be hearing a lot of suggestions. I think we're seeing it in all the media that we consume. And I'd love for you to address a couple of these ideas. So, for example, I mean, I personally have heard a lot about tiny houses in the last couple of years. Can you talk to us a little bit about this tiny house solution to homelessness?
Yeah, so tiny houses, the positive of them is that they're quick to put up. We can put them anywhere. A lot of them are self-contained units, so there's really good things about it. One of the challenging things and kind of unique to Ottawa with the tiny home solution is that we need a lot of land to put these on per unit. So you have to spread them out. There's separation distances, that kind of thing. Also, we have a really cold climate, if you didn't know. So it's definitely gets cold in Ottawa, and as you can probably imagine, insulating 4 walls many, many times is a little more expensive typically than insulating 4 walls with a bunch of units contained inside. So that's one of the reasons why we have focused on really in the City of Ottawa as our official plan and our 10-year housing and homelessness plan is around building density. We want to make sure that we're building buildings that we can put a lot of people in and getting the maximum use for our land. As we know in Ottawa, land itself is very expensive, so we want to make sure we get as many units as we can for every land opportunity we get. And we also get economies of scale when we build like that. So that means we can, with less dollars, build more units and be able to be a little bit more effective in the number of projects we're running.
This really ties in nicely because there's an unprecedented demand on our housing supply. So I know that we recently converted a former office building on Queen Street into housing for newcomers, right? Specifically. So why can't we just do more of that?
That's a really good question. And I just want to say it was very exciting that I think Ottawa was one of the first in Canada to actually convert an office building for transitional housing. So it does support people within the shelter system with a little bit different model from our emergency shelters. And what that has been able to do is add 140 beds to our overall capacity. As you're mentioning earlier, we have a massive problem with permanent capacity within the shelter system, just with the inflow we're seeing. One of the issues with office to residential conversion is you kind of need the ideal site. When you think about how you build an office, you're looking to set that up for office use. So you don't have people there 24 hours. There's different ventilation, HVAC systems that you need to do. We also need to make sure that the configuration is correct. Like, where does the plumbing sit for showers versus just a regular set of bathrooms? So you kind of need the ideal site. And we actually got that with Queen Street. There were still challenges to do it. And I think as we move along, we're going to have more opportunities to look at, are there other ideal buildings? We're working closely with the federal and provincial government at different office acquisition opportunities that can use this. So really, it's something that we would like to do more of. We continue to work with our corporate real estate office at the city to be able to identify these opportunities. It's great when it works, and we're really happy to be a leader in Canada doing that first project.
Yeah, it was a really exciting pilot to see happen in our city. It's interesting to hear you talk about the concept of finding the right space. You know, when you talked about tiny homes, you talked about why space was really important. You talked about density, making sure it works for a family. For example, Seb, you know, it wasn't just you experiencing housing and homelessness, it was your whole family. I was one of a family of 4. And here we're hearing about, converting an office building. We have to think about how we use the space in lots of different ways. It's really fascinating. Given all these complexities, it's really interesting to hear about how other countries around the world, deal with housing and homelessness in their countries. And I've heard that Finland has solved, quote unquote, homelessness. What do you think of what they've done and whether or not some of those strategies would work here?
Yeah, I think Finland's really interesting. We hear this one all the time from folks in the community bringing this forward. It's really neat what they were able to do, but they do have a very different government structure than what we have here in Canada. So they have a single level of government, which provides them the opportunity to act a bit more fast, a bit more unanimously. As you know, and with federalism, we have 3 different levels of government that the city allocates, as I kind of started with. But overall, we actually do take the same principles as what Finland was. We believe housing is a human right, and our 10-year plan is really based around those same principles. Again, it's challenging in how, as compared to Finland, and how we actually allocate our funding because of the different levels of government. But in terms of the overall principles they take, Canada is actually very much in line with what they do. The challenge is that, it requires significant investment. And should we have the same levels of investment Finland's able to do, we are pursuing those same types of opportunities and approach to how they do things.
I think everyone can agree that housing should be a human right. It's important for us to have shelter, to have someone to stay, especially in a country like Canada where it gets cold in the winter. So can you tell us about some of the successes we've actually seen using this kind of approach?
Yeah, so about in 2014, our group, we started something called a housing first approach. And what the housing first approach means is that essentially anyone who is in the country is ready for housing. But what that does require, and one of the big systems we've been trying to set up, is that making sure if you have additional support needs, that we have those in place so that your housing can be successful. The last thing we want to see is put people just into housing without those proper supports. We know the impact can be huge if you're putting into people with inadequate supports. We see issues with neighbors, different tenants. And like really what we're looking to do is making sure that if you're in housing, you're going to be able to stay in that. And that's setting up a framework of health supports around them, wraparound life skills supports, those kind of things. And that's what Housing First is all about. So all of that 10-year housing and homelessness plan has been working from those principles. And it's about building it out with the limited dollars we have to do as much as close to that approach as we can.
And there's something in there I really want to touch on because I've heard a lot of confusion among people that I talk to, and it's supports. What do we mean when we talk about providing supports to people in all kinds of different housing, be it, community housing, shelters, whatever it is? What are those supports?
The supports are really based on the individual. What we want to do, and this is part of our shelter system, our community housing system, is we want to assess what are your needs to be successful. This is something that needs to be self-driven. We want to make sure that those supports are adequate. Some of the really key things is connecting people to health supports. So that might be mental health, addiction support. We also want to make sure a lot of the cases, some people may not be from Canada. We've had a large inflow of newcomers over the last few years that haven't grown up in a Canadian system. So, maybe simple things like using a heating system that you're not used to, or if you come from a warmer country. So basic life skills can really support housing stability, making sure the pipes don't freeze, those kind of things. So practically, we want to do an assessment on a person, family. On the family side of things, there's a lot of time different supports, like how do we put your kids into school? So helping with school registration, helping with financial assistance to do specialized meal programs, making sure that people's needs are met. And a lot of the time, like I said, the primary one is connecting them to healthcare supports and those basic financial, basic need supports that people need to actually stabilize in their housing. As you can probably imagine, if the shelter system offers all of these wonderful things that you're not able to attain in your housing, it's going to not make you want to stay in that housing. So we're really trying to balance whether you're in the shelter system, whether you're actually in housing, that you have those adequate supports, meet your basic financial, food, those kind of needs, and make sure that you have what you need to be stable.
Mm-hmm. You're really talking about a whole system of supports and taking a much more holistic look at what people need to meet just this one human right, to ensure that they've got all these other things sort of scaffolding them. You talked about assessing people for their level of need. And I'd like to think a little bit more about high needs groups. You mentioned newcomers, of course, families. I'm thinking about older adults, women, Indigenous people, and the different types of high needs groups out there. You mentioned mental health needs, et cetera. And I've been in Ottawa for about 15 years now, moving here from Toronto. And I used to live downtown and moved out into a Western neighborhood. And I've noticed now that when I'm downtown, I seem to perceive that people have more acute needs than before compared to when I was living downtown about, 10 or so years ago. Is there truth to that? Or should I ask, what truth is there to that?
Yeah, we absolutely see that. So anyone who has lived here for a number of years, especially in the downtown core, are seeing those increased needs, increasing challenging behaviors that are disrupting daily lives for the residents downtown. And this, again, is not unique to Ottawa. We're seeing this across the country, internationally. This is a growing problem. One of the things that we are noticing, and this is why I keep mentioning health, it's so important that people's health needs are met, whether it be addiction, substance use support, or actual mental health crises. And a lot of the times these can be interlinked. People with acquired brain injury from the toxicity in the drugs are sometimes needing additional mental health supports because of how these drugs are impacting people. So one of the key things we've seen as well is that consumption treatment sites have changed. So we've seen a lot of these downtown. We've seen changing governments taking a different approach on these. But from our side on the housing side is we want to make sure that these two things are interlinked. So the city's really done a lot of work. I work with Ottawa Public Health very closely to try and meet what those needs are, assess them. I'm not certainly going to tell you healthcare expertise here. You got the wrong guy for that. But what I will be doing is we're making sure those health partners are telling us what we need there. We also have directly, like in the shelter system, we have Ottawa Inner City Health that works directly with a lot of these clients, telling us that healthcare expertise for this population. But certainly we've seen an increase in it. And that's why we've also added a lot of specialized programs. So we've added additional outreach supports. We used to have, issues during certain hours of the day. Now we wanted to make sure we had 24/7 outreach coverage that's supporting folks that are not only experiencing mental health or addiction crises. We also want to make sure that we're supporting people in the community, residents, businesses who these behaviors may be impacting. So we really have that focus on making sure that outreach support can interlink with who needs to be there to solve the problems. That includes working with police, bylaw, some of the behaviors, it's not always something we can address as a social service agency. But again, we want to take that human rights approach first. We want to try and support the person. And if that doesn't work, sometimes we do have to work with some of those other partners on the enforcement side of things.
Yeah, it really takes a village, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And working in the market area in the downtown core for the past, it's been like 15 years for me. I've seen that shift, but I know the city's doing a lot of work to try and address some of these acute problems that we've seen pop up. And I think one of them is the Anchor program, or as we call it, the alternate neighborhood crisis response. Can you tell us a bit more about Anchor and what they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really exciting one. And Anchor is something that was actually developed again as part through all of this outreach work with our community health center partners, all those different healthcare partners that are already serving this community. I just want to take a second to touch on too how important the partnerships are. The city doesn't deliver a lot of these services. We work with an amazing set of organizations, both in the health and housing sector, to actually deliver these services. And Anchor was a great thing that was a community-led initiative, which was a really exciting thing for us to be able to develop. And this is a really unique thing in Canada. We're actually, again, kind of leading the charge on these new type of responses. And what it is, it's a 24-hour mobile crisis team that provides free mental health supports. And the ideas we're trying to do is anyone over 16 who can access these, people can call. And we're trying to avoid police calls. And it goes back to that human rights approach. We want to make sure if it's mental health related, it's probably not appropriate that the police are going there unless they're causing an actual harm to somebody else. We want to make sure that it's people with those mental health expertise that are providing that support. And actually, in our first year, after a little bit of analysis, we had a 92% of crisis interventions handled by Anchor be successful that did not require police response. So that is so exciting to see, extremely effective. If you have the right people there, we don't need those police interventions. So a huge credit to everybody who's been involved in that program, and we're really proud and hope that we're able to expand it.
Yeah, this really comes back to that people first approach we've been talking about. And that, like you said, Shirley, it takes a village and we are all in this together, right?
Big congratulations on that program. That's wonderful to hear. And I think that all of our listeners are probably feeling really hopeful. That's very promising that those are the results you got from the Anchor program. We've talked a lot about all the different things that are happening, sort of not even behind the scenes, but like boots on the ground, frontline work that's going on. We're talking about the partnerships that you've got with health partners, with the Ottawa Police. We talked about that Queen Street transitional housing project. We're talking about the Anchor program. There's so much that has happened, and all of this is going on now. We're always looking ahead. So can you tell us more about what's coming up for you and the team and the people that you work with?
Yeah, it's a great question, because one of the things that we notice is our housing and homelessness situation in Ottawa is always changing. Like every community, there's different demands. I mentioned newcomers was a recent trend I don't think anyone saw coming from our side of things that we had to respond to really, really fast. And the city's done an immensely great job with the support of council being able to respond to these changing trends. We update our 10-year housing and homelessness plan every 5 years, but as you can imagine, things even change faster than every 5 years, so we need to be quick. But we are actually into Q1 of 2026. We're going to be updating our 10-year housing and homelessness plan. So we're in a really exciting period right now. I'm doing a lot of consultation with community members, with these expert agencies we work with, of what's changed and what do we need to shift in our 10-year housing and homelessness plan to respond for the next 5 years. Of course, at a high level, but again, just trying to address those changing shifts in demand, making sure priority populations are taken care of. You mentioned like Indigenous, older adults, youth. And a big part of that plan is identifying specific objectives for those groups. We also have a 10-year housing and homelessness plan specific to the Indigenous community that was presented in 2024. And we want to make sure that all of these plans are adequately resourced. So after I'm done this 10-year housing and homelessness plan update with the team, we're going to be moving over to the fun part, which is putting the financials behind it with the next term of council and an updated long-range financial plan. So lots of work ahead of us, but critically important to make sure that we're actually responding to the needs today in the community, which anyone who walks out there sees it. We hear the stories of people, challenges in social housing affordability. So it's going to be responding to those updated trends. Make sure we're doing the most with what we have.
That's really exciting. I have a quick follow-up question, Kale. What does it look like in terms of community engagement, for our dear listeners out there? In what ways can they get involved, or how can they hear about these updates that are happening?
Yeah, so really exciting. We're actually having a virtual info session on September 10th, and we'll provide the information for that. And that's going to be talking a lot about what is the 10-year housing homelessness plan, what are we trying to achieve, what have we achieved, because we've done an immense amount of work already. So that info session is going to kind of be the kickoff. So people have the opportunity to really see what's been done. I know people see the challenges out there, but there's been a lot of positive momentum as well. And we want to make sure we're pivoting to make sure we're addressing to what the emerging community needs are. We're also going to have community engagement sessions upcoming. So these will be in-person sessions where people can drop in, talk to all these wonderful partners and sectors of the people who actually get the work done in our community, provide feedback, ask questions. So we'll be soon landing on all of the dates for those and locations. So look out for those as well.
Amazing.
And to learn more about those and the work that's going on, they can check it out online, right?
Exactly. And all this information on our programming is found on ottawa.ca. We'd need a 4-hour podcast if I were to sit and just go through all of the different work that's happening in the community.
I could be talking to you.
Yeah, and happy to come back.
And they can also go on Engage Ottawa and look up the 10-year housing and homelessness plan there, right?
Yeah, so we've actually had that open for a number of months. Please do check out Engage Ottawa. It's a set of questions. If you want to tell us directly in writing kind of what your experience is, there's some survey questions there, would be an excellent opportunity. And we really do need to hear from the community. As much as we have an immense amount of agencies working in all parts of the cities, a lot of the time we do need to hear the residents of what actually needs to happen to address their needs as well.
Thank you so much, Kale, for coming in and having this conversation with us. We really enjoyed it, and we hope our dear listeners did as well.
Wonderful. Appreciate the opportunity. And I think we'll have to have another discussion soon once it's updated and you'll hear about our new direction.
Absolutely.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
That's the end of our podcast, but it's not the end of the conversation. Remember to visit ottawa.ca for more information about the programs you heard about here. Be on the lookout for upcoming announcements about more City of Ottawa podcasts. That's when we OttaTalk about something completely different. To play us out, here is a little bit more of String My Guitar by the Roberto Hutchins.